Okay, pure competition. One of the characteristics of pure competition is that we have, they're called many sellers. Many sellers. Now, we talked about this before. What's the definition of many sellers? Remember that?
So many that not anyone can influence the market.
Okay, yeah, you got so many that no one can dominate the market, or it can influence the market. I shouldn't say dominate, probably influence is more important. But you can influence without dominating it. Yeah, many sellers, competition, pure competition, has many sellers. So many sellers that no one seller can influence the market by themselves. Under monopolistic competition, we also have large number of sellers. And again, it's similar. What we're saying with a large number of sellers is that no single seller has a large share of the market. Nobody dominates the market in monopolistic competition. Okay, you may have some larger ones, maybe they have a little bit of influence, but nobody dominates, and I guess that's why I changed from dominate to influence here. So in the monopolistic competition, nobody dominates. Under oligopoly, we have few sellers. There are a few sellers. Okay, what's a few sellers mean? 2, 5, 10? Well, it depends. We have a way of defining few sellers with another word. And the term that we use for few sellers is we have few sellers when we see what's called mutual interdependence. Mutual interdependence. If we see mutual interdependence, then that's how we define few sellers. Now I'll define mutual interdependence for you. Okay. What mutual interdependence is, it's the idea that before one seller does anything, they have to take into account what their competitors are going to do. In other words, before an action is taken, a seller will consider the reaction of their competitors. When you have mutual independence, no action is going to be taken until you consider the reactions, or say expected or possible reactions of your competitors. See, if you go down to here, if you're part of this, your many sellers are large, nobody dominates, nobody influences the market. So if you're one of these, you change your price, you're one of so many sellers that nobody's even going to pay attention to you. Okay? But if you're over here, if you're an oligopolist, okay, if you're like General Motors and you're sitting there saying, well, I'm going to raise the price of my cars $500, before you do that, what General Motors does is say, well, what is everyone else going to do if I raise the price of my cars $500? Or if I lower the price of my cars $500, what's everyone else going to do? Are they just going to do the same thing and we just end up with a zero sum? Or if I start giving rebates, is everybody else going to start giving rebates, or am I going to? Mutual independence says that before you make any kind of a decision, you take into account what everyone else is going to, what your competitors are going to do. And that's how we define few sellers. As soon as you get to the point where there's so many people where you're doing some kind of strategy without thinking about what your competitors are going to do, then you're back into one of these areas. Question. Okay, under pure monopoly, then of course what we have is we have one seller. Which, by the way, under pure monopoly, this is probably about the only thing we need to define pure monopoly. One seller, you got one seller, it's pure monopoly, period, end of discussion, really. Move on to that. Okay, questions on the number of sellers? Okay, the second thing we look at is the kind of product we have here. Under pure competition, we have a standardized product. The idea is you can't tell one person's product from the other. It's standardized. Under monopolistic competition, differentiated. In other words, somehow, although the products may be similar, they may almost be identical, somehow the products are different. Differentiated products. A lot of times, under monopolistic competition, the reason that a product is differentiated is simply because of marketing. Okay, in other words, it's not the product itself, you could say the chemical components or something like that are identical in the product, or essentially identical to us. The effects they have on us are identical. However, they're differentiated because of brand name, or because they're in different colored boxes or different colored bottles, or different. In other words, the packaging makes them different. You know, a lot of times that's the thing that can take a product and move it out of purely competitive and move it into make it monopolistically competitive.
You got an example? Be like pop or something like that?
Yeah,
Coke, Pepsi?
pop would be one. Probably things like cigarettes. Huh? Plain label, yeah. Beer is a big one. Beer is, although you know a lot of people will argue with you on that, beers are all essentially the same. However, what you've done is through very successful, in fact, incredibly successful marketing, they've gotten people to believe that beers are actually different. But your really scientific, no, I mean truly, your truly scientific blind taste test, not the one they do on TV, but like I said, the scientifically done blind taste tests on beer have proven that whole beer is pretty much the same. I mean, maybe there's a difference between the real stuff and the light or whatever, but if you're dealing with the same like alcohol content and stuff, there's no difference. The same thing with a lot of the cigarettes. And so what the difference has become is the packaging is different on those things. Now those are good examples of differentiated product, although those, like beer, would probably fit a little closer, possibly, to oligopoly than monopolistic competition. Under oligopoly, it could be either one, standard or differentiated. Okay, so for instance, we just talked about like cigarettes and beer. Probably you put those. At least I think I'd probably put them closer to an oligopoly. Gasolines. That's another one where it's all packaging. You buy gasoline in Sioux City, it all comes out of the same pipeline. But it's differentiated. Oligopoly could be differentiated like we talked about, or it could be standardized like steel industry. I mean, steel is steel, whether you get it from whatever steel company, it's going to be steel. And then, of course, when you get to pure monopoly, we just have one product, one unique product. Questions? Okay. The third characteristic is under pure competition, we deal with barriers to entry. When I say barriers to entry, I also mean exit. There are no barriers to entry or exit. Okay, now barriers to entry or exit, which means that anytime somebody wants to enter into this industry, it's real easy. You just go in and you start start producing or selling or providing the service. It also means that it's easy to exit. Now, easy to exit means you can get out without financial loss. I mean, you can always come back and say, well, it's easy to get out of an industry, you just walk away from it. But easy exit means that, like I said, you get away without financial detriment to yourself. So under pure competition, it's really easy. You see somebody across the street and you say, hey, they're making a profit, I'm gonna go do it. And so you do it, and a couple weeks later, you find out you're not making any much money, and so you leave it, and nothing's changed as far as your financial status. So easy to get into, easy to get out of. Under monopolistic competition, there are few barriers. Oftentimes, whatever barriers there are under monopolistic competition are marketing barriers. For instance, if we get, and when we talk about barriers to entry, normally, I think when we talk about barriers to entry, the thing that immediately comes to mind is financial barriers to entry, right? Okay. The reason it's difficult to get in, I think it's difficult to get into the automobile industry is because you need so much money. It's a financial barrier to entry. But actually, in most instances, it's not so much the financial, it's the marketing. Because if you have a good product, you can usually raise the capital, go out and manufacture it. But the thing that's really difficult to overcome is the marketing barrier to entry. I mean, anybody can go out and you can make cigarettes. Okay, so I mean, there's no financial barrier to entry to making cigarettes. They're pretty easy to make. They're pretty cheap. Technology, it doesn't take a lot of technology to make cigarettes. But you got to go up there and you got to compete against Winston and Marlboro and the Camel guy on the billboards and all that. And that's where the barrier is. Candy bars, the same thing. I mean, there's no big skill or technology or financial problems with making candy bars when you try and sell them and you compete against the brand names. So a lot of times the real big barriers are the marketing barriers, not necessarily the financial barriers. Like I said, we've got efficient financial markets. If you've got a good product, do it. With John DeLorean, his product, his first one. He had a real good product. He found the money for it. Oligopoly, we have large barriers. And over here, we just say there are barriers, or I guess they sort of blocked. Okay, large barriers, and again, barriers, they could be financial, they could be technology, if you don't have the technology, or the rights to the technology, the patents. A lot of times it's marketing barriers, stuff like that. The thing is, again, coming back to the idea of DeLorean, I personally, DeLorean, I think most people would agree that, especially for the time, the DeLorean was a fantastic automobile. I think it was. It was a great car. But the problem was, again, it wasn't the financing, because he had the financial backing to build the cars, but he was up against established name brands. And, I don't think that the car really had a fair shot in terms of, people said, yeah, that's a neat looking car. But it's not made by General Motors or Mercedes or Porsche or one of the names that have been around for 50 or 100 years. And I think that probably is what did him in. Under pure monopoly, it's blocked. The largest barrier, or most common barrier to entry in a pure monopoly is regulation. In other words, you think about like the monopolies we have here in Sioux City. We have electricity, we have gas, we have cable TV, water, telephone, local phone service. Okay, the barrier to entry there is you just can't, it's illegal, you can't compete with it. Right? That's the barrier, regulation. Okay, then, the final characteristic we look at is this thing called non-price competition. And non-price competition basically means advertising. Okay, so there is no, I would just call it what it is, advertising. No advertising. And of course, why is there no advertising under pure competition?
You have a standardized
You
product.
got a standardized product, doesn't make any sense to advertise. You got many sellers, you advertise, you're gonna be subsidizing everybody else's product with your advertising, so it doesn't make any sense to advertise. Okay, here though, you have a differentiated product, and so under monopolistic competition, we have vigorous advertising. Okay, and like I said, a lot of times, the thing that actually makes this a differentiated product is this vigorous advertising, the extensive advertising. You remember what we do, we try to shift that demand curve, we try to make consumers believe that it's something else, or it's something different, or it's a necessity, not a luxury, or whatever. So we have vigorous advertising going on here. Okay. This one here, of course, is the depends. There's some advertising. Depending on, of course, if it's a standardized product, you don't have any. We don't see any advertisements for steel. If it's something like automobiles, then we see a lot of advertising, because it's a differentiated product. So that runs the spectrum. Under monopolies, we see some advertising, although most of the advertising here is informative. It's just, for instance, well, I don't have it anymore, but when AT&T was a monopoly, we'd get ads from AT&T, and basically their ads would be to tell you that you got better rates if you called after 5 o'clock, and even better if you called after 11 o'clock, and stuff like that. Okay, or IPS may, tell you to weatherproof or something in your house and stuff like that. So you really don't see advertising as such in terms of trying to increase sales. Most of the advertising under monopolies try to increase efficiency of their operations. Question. Okay, pure competition, what's an example of pure competition?
Agriculture.
Okay. Agriculture is used most often. We really don't have any any example of pure competition, perfect form. There's many sellers, no one farmer can dominate the market, does dominate or even influence the market, let's say corn, beans, or wheat. It is a standardized product, you can't tell one person's from the next. There certainly is no advertising. The only problem we have a little problem here is the barriers to entry. There are significant barriers to entry into farming and barriers to getting out of farming. But with the exception of this one here, it fits in here pretty good. Another area that falls under here is the stock market. Okay. Essentially, if you think of for large shares of, say, General Motors stock, there's many sellers, many buyers, many sellers of General Motors stock. It's a standardized product. You can't tell one share of General Motors stock from somebody else. It's easy to get into and easy to get out to. I mean, granted, you have to have the price of the share, but there's no sunk cost in getting into the market or out. And there's essentially no advertising for a particular share. So sometimes they sort of twist and say, well, the stock market might fit here under pure competition too. Although in certain ones, you get the Ivan Boskis in there, I suppose, it screws things up a little bit. Monopolistic competition, what are examples of those? Okay, toothpaste would be, well, I'm not sure if toothpaste would be there, or that might be closer to oligopoly. things like, you know, toothpaste and pop and cigarettes, I have a feeling probably fall someplace down here. These things sort of split some, not quite monopolistic competition yet, they're not quite oligopoly. A lot of your retail outlets are here, but oligopoly automobiles, of course, would fit in there. Steel. And then a pure monopoly would be your utilities. Okay, question. Okay, so this is really done quite a bit because we've outlined 4 chapters here. One thing, just to bring you up to on the author's terminology here, is we take this whole thing, we break it into 2 categories. We have pure competition, or we call it perfect competition, and then everything that isn't pure competition is what's called imperfect competition. So every once in a while, you'll hear this discussion, you read this discussion of pure or perfect discussion, and pure or perfect competition and imperfect competition. Imperfect competition just means it's something other than pure competition. Okay. Questions now? Okay, pure competition then. We already went through the characteristics of them. There's many sellers, standardized product, non-price competition or advertising, easy entry and exit. If we look on page 492, the first thing we want to do is look at the demand curve for a perfectly competitive industry. And what we see is that in a perfectly competitive industry, this is what the demand curve looks like. The demand curve for a perfectly competitive industry is purely, what, elastic or inelastic? Perfectly elastic, right? Perfectly elastic. Now again, go back to your example or one we used before of the farmer as a purely competitive industry. Okay, if the price of corn is $2, that means that the farmer can go out, the market price is $2. The farmer will go out and sell as much as he wants at $2. The thing is, if the market price is exactly $2, if the farmer goes out and demands $2.01, immediately the amount that he can sell is dropped down to 0 because there are so many other farmers out there selling at $2, nobody's going to even pay 1 penny a bushel more. Okay. And then at the same time, there's no reason for him to go down to $1.99 if he can sell for $2. So the purely competitive industry, the demand curve is a horizontal line. It's perfectly elastic. Now, if you look at the bottom of page 492, what you have there is the demand curve. Column 2 is the quantity demanded, 0, 1, 2, 3, up to 10. And the product price is $131. It never changes. Notice in column 4 that because the price never changes, the marginal revenue never changes. So the demand curve is equal to marginal revenue. Now, if we go back and define marginal revenue, Marginal revenue, that's the additional revenue you get from selling one more unit. Marginal revenue is the additional revenue you get from selling one more unit. Sits our demand, so marginal revenue. In the short run, there's two things that we want to do. So we want to maximize profit, or if we can't do that, we want to minimize losses. Right? First thing we do is maximize profits. If we can't maximize profits, then at the very least what we want to do is we want to minimize our losses. Is this also true about the long run, by the way? Should that be our goals in the long run? In other words, in the long run, should we either maximize profits, or if we can't maximize profits in the long run, we should minimize losses?
You wouldn't keep minimizing losses in the long run, would you?
No. In the long run, all you do is maximize profits or go out of business. Because in the long run, you've got a chance to change everything. I mean, you can build a whole new company, and if you're saying, well, in the long run, after I change everything, I'm still losing money, what you're saying is you shouldn't do business. So, yeah. The short run, we maximize profits or minimize losses. However, in the long run, the only thing we do is maximize profits or go out of business. Now, there are two ways to minimize losses. And the two ways to minimize losses is we can continue production, or we can shut down. And we just have to look at the difference in the cost. Now remember, you've got that thing out there called fixed cost, which is always out there. So if you've already determined that you can't maximize profits, but you're going to be minimizing losses, what you have to decide is, where do you lose the least amount of money? By continuing production, or do you lose even less money if you just shut down and just incur your fixed costs? We'll run through examples of that so you see how that works. Now, if we're looking at maximizing profits, there's a couple of different ways to do this. One is one that you're probably real familiar with. It's simply the total receipts minus total cost. So how we determine how we can maximize profits. And if you look at page 494, they go through it for us. Right? Table 25.3. In column 2, we're given total revenue. In column 5, we're given total costs. So you take column 2, revenue minus